Yes, we can.
Okay. So, what were we discussing? Yeah. He gives sage Valmiki the task of composing the entire Ramayana. And then Brahma gives sage Valmiki a boon. He says, once you do achamana, that is by after taking water 3 times in your hand, after you do the achamana and sit down, you shall be able to visualize the entire story of Sri Rama, Sita Devi, Lakshmana, and all the characters in the Ramayana, whatever has happened in the past, whatever is currently ongoing, and whatever is about to happen, you shall be able to visualize everything. The other boon that Brahma gives sage Valmiki is that you shall not only be able to see whatever has happened, is happening, and will happen, you will also be able to perceive their innermost thoughts that they are not speaking out. So sometimes it is possible that I am talking to somebody, but in my mind something else is going on. So sage Valmiki could not only see what is happening on the exterior, but he could also perceive their innermost thoughts. And then Brahma says, in this manner, when you compose this epic, whatever you write in the Ramayana, there shall not be any untruth in this. So that is why we consider the Valmiki Ramayana as the source document of events of the Ramayana. So if we have to understand, did this really happen in the Ramayana or not, we must refer to Valmiki Ramayana, because as told by Brahma, that whatever you compose shall be only the truth. There shall be no lie in this composition. Also, because of the greatness of sage Valmiki, we consider that the Valmiki Ramayana is the source document. After giving this boon to sage Valmiki, Brahma disappeared from his asana. Sage Valmiki and his disciples were obviously astonished that the creator of this world has given such a huge mandate to them. And then sage Valmiki, he sat down in a clean place on a mattress made out of darba grass. Especially when you are sitting for any rituals, you must not sit on the bare earth. So they will always put at least a mat, a straw mat or something to sit on. You must not sit on bare earth when you are performing any rituals. And then he sat and he did achamana 3 times, and he went into a deep state of meditation. And in that state of meditation, to sage Valmiki, it felt like in the palm of his hand an orb had appeared, and in that orb he could see the entire life story of Sri Rama and Sita Mata play out. And he could also perceive their innermost thoughts. And thus he started to compose Srimad Ramayana. He composed the entire Ramayana in 24,000 shlokas. After composing the 24,000 shlokas, he gave the Ramayana 3 names. First name he gave is Srimad Ramayanam, which is the story of Rama. Second name he gave is Sitayaha Charitam Mahat, because this story is talking about the great story, life story of Devi Sita. It is Sitayaha Charitam Mahat. And the third name he gave is Paulastya Vadha. So you see who is Ravana. Ravana, there is a misconception that Ravana is a Dravidian and all those things. So when Brahma created this world, out of his will, he created some sages. One of those sages created by Brahma is sage Pulastya. Pulastya Brahma he is called as. Ravana is the grandson of sage Pulastya. That's why he is known as Paulastya Brahma. He is 4th generation from Brahma. He is Brahma's great grandson. This Ramayana describes how this Paulastya was killed. That is why it is known as Paulastya Vadha. Now he composed this Ramayana, and sage Valmiki says, I have composed this in 7 kandas, and he called them Bala, Ayodhya, Aranya, Kishkinda, Sundara, Yuddha, and Uttarakanda. As I already described to you, this Ramayana, when sage Valmiki was composing the Srimad Ramayana, what he did is he composed it in such a manner that the first shloka begins with the first letter of the Gayatri mantra. Then the 1001st shloka begins with the second letter of Gayatri mantra. 2001st shloka begins with the third letter of Gayatri mantra, and so on. And so if you take the first letters of these shlokas, it will create the Gayatri mantra. Now there is also a tradition of doing Parayana of only these shlokas. These 24 shlokas, if you do Parayana, this is known as Gayatri Ramayana. And here I have listed these shlokas. The first words of these shlokas are listed in these slides for your reference. So you see, the first three are from Balakanda, next few are from Ayodhya Kanda. Then you can see shlokas, two shlokas in the Kishkinda Kanda, then Sundarakanda 3, Yuddha Kanda, and you see Uttarakanda. Without the Uttarakanda, without the addition of Uttarakanda to the 24,000, you cannot complete the Gayatri mantra. That is why traditional scholars will tell you that Uttarakanda is also composed by sage Valmiki. It is, we do not accept the assumption that Uttarakanda was composed by later sages only until Yuddhakanda was composed by a sage Valmiki. Traditional scholarship does not accept this. Okay, now that he has composed the Srimad Valmiki Ramayana, now he has to teach this to somebody. He cannot compose this and keep it to himself. This knowledge has to be propagated. This has to be spread. So he was searching for students to teach this Ramayana to. So what kind of students did he need? First, those students who had clear diction in order to correctly pronounce these shlokas. Second, these students must be able to remember all 24,000 shlokas of the Ramayana. Third, they must have melodious voices and must be able to sing and perform these to stringed instruments. Fourth, they must be able to tour towns and perform these shlokas in front of wide audience. So where to find? And of course, they must also be able to learn and acquire this epic from sage Valmiki quickly. They must not take too many years to learn this. They must be able to learn very, very quickly. So in Sanskrit, there is a concept of Eka Santagrahi. If you read once, you shall understand the concept clearly. No need to explain. There used to be this concept of Eka Santagrahi. So they must be like that. With one reading, they must be able to understand the concept. Sage Valmiki was looking for students like this. He realized that two such students existed in his own ashrama. They were none other than the sons of Devi Sita and Sri Rama, and their names were Kusha and Lava. These two kids happened to have been delivered in the ashrama of sage Valmiki. So then sage Valmiki started to teach the entire Ramayana excluding the Uttarakanda, because these are future events. He did not teach Kusha and Lava Uttarakanda. Until Yuddhakanda, he taught the entire Ramayana to the boys. And after they learnt the Ramayana, they performed first in the Valmiki ashrama. After their first performance, all the sages in the Valmiki ashrama were so impressed. In the ashrama of sage Valmiki, there are also some visiting sages who have come from other ashramas. They heard this Ramayana recitation by Kusalava. They were so impressed. They wanted to give something. So some people were praising the sons. Aha, what sweet voices. Such divine rendition. It's like Gandharvas are singing in our ears. It's like all our sins have been washed away. They gave whatever they had. Somebody had a kamandalu, say they gave their kamandalu. Somebody had their meditation stick, they gave up their meditation stick to the boys. Somebody had a deer skin, they gave it to the boys. Because they want to appreciate, show their appreciation to the boys. Then Lava Kusha started touring different cities and happened to come to Ayodhya, and they started singing the Ramayana on the streets of Ayodhya. And then they came close to the palace of Sri Rama, and one day, standing from his balcony, Sri Rama could hear these two boys singing this sweet song melodiously. So immediately he sent his soldiers and he asked to have the boys escorted to his palace. And then he called everybody. He called his mothers, his brothers, wives, everybody. Everybody sat down in the court of Sri Rama, and Kusha and Lava were asked to perform the Srimad Ramayana. We will not venture into what happened, how did Rama see Lava and Kusha. All that we will come to when we come to the Uttarakanda. But now let's go to Srimad Ramayana. What exactly has been described in the Ramayana? So in the beginning of Srimad Ramayana, the city of Ayodhya is described. Can you see this image? The image to your right hand side is known as Ashtapadi. But if you look at it, what does it resemble? What board does this look like to you? A very popular game is played on a similar looking board these days. Does it look like a chess board? So basically, yeah, the city of Ayodhya is a planned city, and it was planned like the grids of a chessboard. So the image on the left hand side, I have tried to represent what the city of Ayodhya would have looked like back in the reign of Dasharatha. It was a well planned city, and it was situated on the banks of the river Sarayu, which is in current Uttar Pradesh. This city, Ayodhya, was the capital. The larger kingdom was known as Kosala, and the city of Ayodhya was being ruled by Dasharatha as the capital of the kingdom of Kosala. Also, the city was originally built by Manu, who is the progenitor of the Ikshvaku dynasty, one of the earliest kings of the Ikshvaku dynasty. It is also stated that this city of Ayodhya is Loka Vishruta, popular across the world. At that time, the dimensions of Ayodhya are mentioned also in the Srimad Ramayana. They say the city is 12 yojanas in length and 3 yojanas in breadth. So 1 yojana can typically be translated into 12.8 kilometers. So the dimensions of Ayodhya in length is approximately 153.6 kilometers, and by width it is 38.4 kilometers wide. So almost twice the size of Luxembourg, you can say. The city shines with great well laid royal highways, and these highways have trees planted on both the sides, and these highways are always wetted with water. So that means there is ample amount of rainfall, and when it is required there is rainfall. All the trees that are lining these streets are flowering trees, and the petals of those flowers are strewn everywhere on the sidewalk. And this city is surrounded by big gateways and archways, and they describe what kind of buildings are there in these. Apparently the buildings are 7 stories tall in the city of Ayodhya, and they had all kinds of machinery and weaponry and craftsmen, and this city was being ruled by King Dasharatha with lot of prosperity. It was so prosperous that homes were studded with precious gemstones, and it almost looked like the capital of Indra in Swargaloka. It looked like Amaravati. Now let's see who are the people who inhabit Ayodhya. What kind of people inhabit Ayodhya? So they said this city of Ayodhya, it has people who are well versed in the Vedas. So all the people of Ayodhya are well versed in the Vedas, and lot of scholars are coming from all over the world. The people are rich and they are very strong. this king Dasharatha was not only liked by the residents of Ayodhya, but he was also appreciated and admired by people who lived in other regions of the Kosala kingdom. Even in the countryside, he was very admired. And they had a lot of chariots and chariot warriors. So, Radhis and Maharadhis. And these kings of Ikshvaku were known to perform many Vedic rituals. This Dasharatha is described as a very virtuous king. He had great self-control and he is called a Raja Rishi. So he was ruling the kingdom like a saint. Why this quality of Raja Rishi is so emphasized is when kings were anointed, they did not take it as a privilege. Being a king was not a privilege, but being a king was considered a responsibility. In that line of responsibility, you could not say, but this is my private life. I would like to keep my private life separate from my official duties. No, you went all in. When you became the king, the only duty that mattered to you was the welfare of your kingdom. Everything else is subservient to that objective. And this great king Dasharatha was a Raja Rishi. So he was ruling his kingdom without any desires for his self. He spent all his time in the welfare of his kingdom. And he was renowned in all the three worlds. His enemies he had eliminated. So he had no enemies. But at the same time, he had a lot of well-wishers and friends. He was the conqueror of his senses. Like Manu protects these worlds, he was protecting the people of Ayodhya. Now, what are the people of Ayodhya like? The people of Ayodhya, they have, there is no householder in Ayodhya who is not earning enough to maintain his family. And there is no householder who does not have cows or horses, or there is no household which is lacking in money or lacking in food grain. Like today, there is no hunger problem, no disease problem, no problems of theft that is there in Ayodhya. Why? Because administration is so strong. Implementation of justice is so strong. So what is the family definition in the city of Ayodhya? A family consisted of a householder, his wife, sons or daughters, daughters-in-law, one guest, at least one guest, and the parents of this householder. So an average family size in Ayodhya was 10 family members. No person in Ayodhya was lustful or miserly or cruel or was a non-believer in the scriptures. There was no person like that. There was no atheist. There was nobody who had not learned the Vedas. There was nobody who was indulging in jealousy or unscholarly activities. And Ayodhya was full of people who not only learned the Vedas but also the 6 Vedangas. There was nobody who was having a sad heart or turmoil in their minds. There was no untimely deaths. Every person was dying after seeing their 4th generation. And how were the people of Ayodhya dressed? There was no person in Ayodhya, a man who did not have earrings or who did not have a headgear, what we call as pagdi. Nobody was living in Ayodhya without a pagdi. And they all like to wear garlands around their neck. And they all like to embellish their bodies with some kind of cosmetic paste, sandalwood paste, turmeric paste, several kinds of cosmetic, rose paste, these kind of pastes they had on their bodies. So they were never stinking of sweat or things like that. And also the women were bedecked in all kinds of jewelry. They were wearing jewelry on their waist, in their necks, in their ears, in their hair, in their arms, on their legs, on their toes. So all kinds of jewelry the women were wearing. So besides the city itself, for up to 2 kilometers from the outskirts also, this city was fortified. And this Dasharatha, he had several ministers, but before the ministers, he had 2 important gurus. the most important guru for Dashratha was sage Vashishta, who had been the teacher of the kings of Ikshvakus for many generations, and he was also the teacher of the generations after Dasharatha in the line of Ikshvaku. Besides sage Vashishta, there was also sage Vamadeva, and other gurus who regularly advised our Dasharatha were Suyagnya, Jabali, Kashyapa, Gautama, Markandeya, Dirghayu, Katyayana. These scholars were frequently visiting Dasharatha. But there was one problem. This king Dasharatha, he had one big worry. It is the fact that he had no heir to the kingdom. He had no heir to carry forward the line of his ancestors. So then Dasharatha was always worried, and then one day he thought that he should perform an Ashwamedha Yajna, he should pacify the gods, and he should get heir who can rule after him. So he then decided that okay, I shall perform an Ashwamedha Yajna. Then he called his ministers to go and bring all his gurus. And when all the gurus came, Dashratha informed the gurus, including sage Vashishta, Vamadeva, Katyayana, Kashyapa. He said, I want to perform this Ashwamedha Yajna in order to beget a son. So the gurus, they were very happy with the decision of Dasharatha. And they said, yes, indeed, you are capable of organizing such a large event as an Ashwamedha Yajna. The Ashwamedha Yajna demands a lot of resources. So for 1 year continuously the sacrificial offering has to be continued. What they will do is, in the beginning they will do a puja to a horse, and the horse shall be released in the earth, and this horse shall be followed by the armies of Dasharatha. Wherever this horse will go, if it enters into a territory of a different king, that other king has two choices. They can either let the horse pass through their kingdom, or they can stop the horse. If you stop the horse, you have to fight with Dasharatha's armies. That means you have declared war on Dasharatha. But if you allow the horse to pass through, you have accepted the sovereignty of Dasharatha, and you shall pay taxes to Dasharatha. This is the Ashwamedha. For 1 year, the horse shall go all around the realm, and it returns back. It is brought back to the Yajnasala. And while the horse is away, continuously for 1 year, the Yajna has to continue. Not only that, you have to invite kings from all over the lands. You have to invite artists, other scholars will come, other great sages will come. You have to take care of their boarding, their lodging, their food, their entertainment. You have to arrange all these things. So it involves a lot of expenditure. So the sages said, yes, Dasharatha, indeed you are capable of organizing a yajna like this. So please go ahead, you have our blessings. The sages said one more thing. They said, definitely your wish for an heir shall be fulfilled. So before Dasharatha has even started the first arrangements to perform the Ashwamedha Yajna, the result of the Ashwamedha Yajna has been guaranteed. Why? Because the sages have spoken so. Sages, their words have lot of power. Even our words have lot of power. That's why our elders used to say, speak less, conserve your energy, because speech is transforming your prana sakti into sound energy. So you must speak less. You must speak nice things. You have to choose your words very carefully. You must not use unpleasant words. You must always speak nice things. And you will observe, and your speech has to be truthful. If you have said anything, then you must try to accomplish that. You must not say one thing and not do it. If we stick to this, if we use our words wisely, and if we stand by our words, we will observe that our words acquire a certain energy by themselves. Sometimes when we say some things, those things will come true. So the sages, because they were practicing such stringent rituals and such stringent austerities, their words had power. And when they blessed Dasharatha, Dasharatha already knew that his efforts will bear fruit. Then, after taking permission from the sages, Dasharatha met up with his 3 wives, Kaushalya, Sumitra, Kaikeyi, in order to get their consent also to perform the yajna. It is indicated in our Shastras that a yajna cannot be performed by somebody who is not married. You have to be married and your wife has to be alive in order to be eligible to perform any ritualistic activities. Without wife, you don't have the eligibility to perform. And so it is important to get the consent of the wife. So Dashratha holds a meeting with his 3 wives and informs them that he wants to perform an Ashwamedha Yajna to get an heir. The wives are also very happy. Kaushalya, Sumitra and Kaikeyi, they immediately accept the proposition of Dashratha. So after some time, this minister of Dashratha by the name Sumantra, he asks for a meeting with Dashratha and he comes to meet Dashratha. He comes and he says, Dashratha, maybe you don't remember, a long time ago, the sage Sanat Kumara had made a prediction that you shall receive 4 sons. You shall get 4 sons. And I want to tell you also that a very interesting story that I heard in the past about a sage known as Rishyashringa. So Dashratha is shocked. He has not remembered that earlier prediction was made that he will have 4 sons. So then he asks Sumantra, tell me more about, what are you trying to tell me? Tell me more. So he says, okay, in a long time ago, sage Kashyapa had a son, and this son was a great sage by the name Vibhandaka. This great sage Vibhandaka, since the time of birth, was always busy in the pursuit of Brahmagyana. So he went off into deep forests and was always immersed in great tapas and great, Vedic study and all that. In due course, he wanted to have a son because it is mandated in the Shastras to have a child. It can be a girl or a boy, but you must have a child. So when he wanted to have a child, he did not want to break his celibacy. So like we have today in vitro fertilization, we don't need biologically for the parents to, interact in order to have the egg fertilized. So he used technology of those times and he embedded his seed into a deer and had a son like that. And this great son, who was born out of the celibacy of sage Vibhandaka, was born with antlers of the deer. So then he became known as Rishyashringa. Rishya is sage, Shringa is, you can see, small antlers, right? So he was known as sage Rishyashringa. This sage Rishyashringa, after he was born, he was raised by his father, sage Vibhandaka, and since childhood he was in pursuit of Vedic knowledge and in the pursuit of Brahman, and he had lived deep in the forest, away from all civilization, in deep forest, always in deep meditation and pursuit of knowledge. Now on the other hand, somewhere near eastern Bihar today and closer to Jharkhand and eastern Bihar, there is a kingdom, and the name of this kingdom is Anga. This kingdom of Anga is ruled by a king called as Romapada. And this kingdom of Romapada is going through a very, very severe famine at this point of time. There is no rainfall in this kingdom for several months. Is it 12:30 or 12:20 time? Okay. So because of this drought, this Romapada was very, very concerned and he called all his ministers. He said, give me some ways to come out of this drought situation. What can we do? Because my people are suffering. So the people, the sages, they suggested that, Romapada, very close to our kingdom in the forest, deep inside the forests, there lives this sage Vibhandaka, and he has a great son of great ascetic capabilities. His name is Rishyashringa. If you somehow manage to bring Rishyashringa into this kingdom of Anga, the first foot he sets into this kingdom, there shall be rainfall and the famine will be ended. So you go and bring Rishishringa. But how to bring Rishishringa? This sage Vibandaka is known to be very strict and very, very, difficult to please. So he will never permit Rishishringa, who is immersed in the knowledge of Brahman. He is raised to pursue Brahmajnana. He is not raised to work with civilization, work with society. He will never allow Rishishringa to come to a city or a town to interact with civilization. So how to bring Rishishringa? Then the minister suggested that why don't you call some of your most beautiful court dancers and you ask your court dancers to disguise themselves as female ascetics and send them to this forest when Vibandaka is away, and they shall be able to then bring Rishishringa to your kingdom. So then he sends his court dancers, and what they do, these dancers, they go and they set up a hermitage close to where Rishishringa is staying, and they see that he goes to one particular patch in the forest to pick flowers every day. They also go to that patch in the forest and they also pluck flowers, and they are laughing and they are cackling. And then Rishishringa looks at these ascetics, female ascetics. He has never seen the female form before this. It's the first time he is looking at the female form. So he goes and says, "Who are you people? Where have you come from?" And he says, "We are also ascetics. We are also, our ashrama is also close by. You can please come and you can visit our ashrama." So he goes. Then they serve him all kinds of Rajasic sweets. So all kinds of sweets. And he eats those sweets. He looks at them first. He has never seen anything like this before. He says, "What is this?" "These are fruits from our kingdom." So he eats those sweets. And he says, "Thank you very much. I'll take my leave." He goes back to his ashrama. But the seed of Rajasa has already been planted in him. So Rajasa is acts of passion. Arjuna is a passionate warrior. So Rajasa qualities. So he goes to his ashrama and he says, "I must meet these ladies again and I must ask them to give me this fruit. It's very tasty. I want more of this." So the next day he invites those ascetics to his place and say, "Where have you come from? Where can I get more of this?" So then they tell him, "If you are willing to come to our kingdom, then you can have more, and there are many more varieties that we couldn't carry here." So on this pretext, they bring Rishishringa into the kingdom of Anga, and the first minute sage Rishishringa sets foot in the kingdom of Anga, rainfall follows him, and the famine in Angadesa, in the kingdom of Romapada, ends. As a token of gratitude, Romapada marries his daughter Shanta, who he has adopted from Dasharatha. So once Romapada was visiting Dasharatha, and Dasharatha has a daughter called Shanta. So this Shanta, she is very, very beautiful and very, very pious. So Romapada, when he saw Shanta offering services to him, he was overcome by fatherly emotion, and he requested Dasharatha that he should adopt Shanta. So Dasharatha agreed and gave Shanta as the adopted daughter of Romapada. So when Rishishringa came to Angadesa and he ended the famine, he married Shanta to Rishishringa, and Rishishringa and Shanta were living happily in Angadesa with Romapada, of course, after seeking permission of sage Vibandaka. So now Sumantra narrates all this story to Dasharatha and says, "See Dasharatha, if you are going to perform, O great king, if you are anyway you're going to perform the Ashwamedha Yajna, it is my suggestion to you that if you bring somebody like the great Rishishringa, who with just stepping into a kingdom has ended a famine, his ascetic power is so high that if he comes and presides on your Ashwamedha Yajna, then there is no doubt that your Yajna shall be successful." Then Dasharatha says, "Okay Sumantra, then immediately please go to Romapada and request my daughter and son-in-law to come to Ayodhya and preside over the Ashwamedha Yajna." So immediately the next day Sumantra goes to Angadesa, and there he requests in front of Romapada to send Rishishringa and Shanta over to Ayodhya. Then when Sumantra requests like this to Romapada, Romapada says, my son-in-law is free to make his decision. Whatever his decision is shall be acceptable to me, and redirects the question to Rishishringa. Rishishringa says, if my father-in-law permits, I am happy to come. So here Ramayana is telling us how the respect between son-in-law and father-in-law must be. In our Sanatana Dharma, there is something called as Pitru Panchaka, concept of the five supposed fathers. A human should consider 5 people as their fathers. First is your biological father. Second is your elder brother. If you have an elder brother, you must treat them like your father. The third is father-in-law. Father-in-law also must be treated like father. And father-in-law also must treat daughter-in-law or son-in-law like they treat their own children. The third is your guru. Your teacher must be treated as father. That's why Sanatana Dharma does not accept marriage between guru and sishya. And the king of the land must also be treated as father. And the king of the land must treat his subjects as his children. So very gladly Romapada gives permission, and Rishishringa and Shanta arrive in Ayodhya. Here you can see they are welcomed in a very pompous manner. In the next session, we shall start to see the ritual of Ashwamedha Yajna, how all the devatas actually come and present themselves in the Ashwamedha Yajna, and why when you are conducting rituals where devatas are invoked, the platform where such rituals are performed must be clean, and all kinds of cleanliness rituals shall be followed. If there is any questions or comments, please feel free. I will stop sharing my screen now. Yes.
You said that Dasharatha had a daughter. But
Yes.
How did I thought he didn't have any children?
He had a daughter. He did not have an heir.
Oh, okay.
He had a daughter who was given away as a adopted daughter to Romapada.
Okay.
But back in the day, it was tradition for. So maybe it will sound a little controversial, but I will try to explain to the best of my abilities why they were seeking a male child. In the next session, we can discuss this because it's a little. It'll take a little bit of time, and I want to explain it in a clearer manner so that there is no feeling that they are discriminating against women. All that is current concepts in the modern era. Na? Back in the day, these concepts did not have relevance. Discrimination against women or the caste system. It is not a caste system, it's a fourfold society. Division of labor is what we call it. We all don't do everything inefficiently. Everybody has their specialization and they do that one specialization to the best of their abilities. It's division of labor, fourfold society. Caste is a different concept and it has different connotations. The word caste is not correct to describe. We can say Varna and Jati. These are the two concepts our Sanatana society had. Varna is professional hue, what profession you are following, and Jati is what ancestral DNA you carry in yourself. These concepts existed in Sanatana society. Let me stop my screen sharing. Any other questions? Any other comments?
No questions for me.
Okay. Then,
No questions. And thank you for the Gayatri Ramayana.
it's a pleasure, total pleasure. I shall see you all next Saturday. Then, Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.